Sechet Brachot, Daf Lamed Vav Amud Bet, 36b, near the end of the page. According to the halacha, one does not recite a blessing over dry peppers, as they are usually not eaten. Over damp, fresh peppers one recites who creates the fruit of the ground, as they are only eaten dry in mixtures with other foods. How is this law derived? The Gemara says, Pilpile, Rav Sheshet Amar She'akol, Rava Amar Lo Klum, Va'azda Rava L'ta'ameh, Da'amar Rava, Kas Pilpile B'yoma Dichipore Patur, Kas Zangavila B'yoma Dichipore Patur. The question arose with regard to the blessing over peppers. Rav Sheshet said, one who eats peppers must recite by whose word all things came to be. Rava said, one need not recite a blessing at all. This is consistent with Rava's opinion that eating peppers is not considered eating. As Rava said, one who chews on peppers on Yom Kippur is exempt. One who chews on ginger on Yom Kippur is exempt. Eating sharp spices is an uncommon practice, and therefore not considered to be eating, which is prohibited by Torah law on Yom Kippur. Meitive, Haya Rabbi Meir Omer, Mashma shene'amar va'araltem arloto et piryo. Eni yodea she'etz ma'chalhu? The Gemara raises an objection to this based on what was taught in a Braita, that regarding the verse, when you enter the land and plant any tree for food, you shall regard the fruit as orla. Again, orla is the prohibition of eating fruit from the trees within the first 3 years of its having been planted. After 3 years, the fruit may be eaten. Rabbi Meir would say, by inference, from that which is stated, you shall regard its fruit as orla, don't I know that it is referring to a tree that produces food? Isn't that obvious? Ele ma Talmud lomar etz ma'achal? Why does the Torah say a tree for any tree for food? Lahavi etz shetam etzo ufiryo shaveh. This comes to include a tree whose wood and fruit have the same taste. Ve'ezehu zeh hapilpilin. This, what is it? This is the pepper tree, and this comes to teach you that peppers, even the wood portions, are edible, and therefore, l'lamed chashe pilpilin chayavin bo'orla, that peppers are edible, even the wood portion are edible, and therefore obligated in the prohibition of orla. U'lelamed chashe ein Eretz Yisrael chasera klum. It also comes to teach you that the land of Israel lacks nothing. Shene'amar, Eretz asher lo v'miskanut tochal ba lechem lo techsar kol ba. As it also says about the land of Israel, a land where you shall eat bread without scarceness, you shall lack nothing. So obviously peppers are fit for consumption. Lo kasha, ha biritivta, ha biveshta. The Gemara responds, it's not a difficulty between the two different cases. This, where Rabbi Meir spoke of peppers fit for consumption, is referring to a case where it is damp and fresh. And this, where chewing on peppers is not considered eating on Yom Kippur and does not require a blessing, is referring to a case when it is dry. Amrei la Rabbanan lemaremar. With regard to the discussion of chewing peppers in Yom Kippur, the Gemara cites what the sages said to Maremar. Kas zangavila b'yom kippur patur. V'ha'amar Rava. Why is one who chews ginger on Yom Kippur exempt? Didn't Rava say, Hai hilchata da'atya mibe hinduai, be hindue, sharia? Didn't Rava say one is permitted to eat ginger that comes from India, or in the language of the Gemara, hindue? It sounds like Hindu, sharia. It's permitted, Rava said it's permitted to eat ginger that comes from India, and over it one recites Mavarchin ale borei pri adama, and one says the blessing who creates the fruit of the ground. With regard to blessing, it is considered edible, and therefore with regard to chewing on Yom Kippur, it should be considered edible as well. It's not a difficulty where this, when a blessing is recited, is referring to when it is damp and fresh. And this, when there's no blessing recited, is referring to a case where it is dry. Chavitz kedera v'chein daisa. The Gemara cites a similar dispute with regard to the blessing recited over chavitz. That's a certain dish consisting of flour, oil, honey, and honey cooked in a pot. V'chein daisa, as well as pounded grain. Now nowadays, daisa is, in the modern Hebrew, is porridge. But in the old days it was not the same, it was just simply pounded grain, which could be made into porridge if cooked. So the question is, what blessings do we say over chavitz, this special dish, or flour, honey, oil, and cooked in a pot, as well as the pounded grain? Rav Yehuda Amar she'akol ni'eh b'dvaro. Rav Yehuda says we say by whose word all things came to be. Rav Kahana Amar borei minei mazonot. Rav Kahana says we say who creates the various kinds of nourishment. B'daisa greda kule alma lo pligi devorei minei mazonot. With regard to pounded grain alone, everybody agrees that you recite who creates the various kinds of nourishment. Ki pligi b'daisa ke'en chavitz kedera. When they dispute, they're disputing the regard to pounded grain mixed with honey in the manner of a chavitz cooked in a pot. Rav Yehuda Amar she'akol. In such a case, Rav Yehuda says you say by whose word all things came to be. In the Savar Duvsha Ikar. He claims that the main point of the chavitz is the honey. Savar Smida Ikar. Rav Kahana Amar borei minei mazonot. Rav Kahana says you say who creates different kinds of nourishment. He claims that the smida, the flour, is the primary food, over which you would say mazonos. Amar Rav Yosef kvatei de Rav Kahana mistabra. According to Rav Yosef, it is reasonable to say according with the opinion of Rav Kahana, as Rav and Shmuel both said. The Rav Shmuel Amar Tarvayu kol sheyesh ba mechameshet aminin mavarchin ala borei minei mazonot. They said both anything which has of the 5 species of grain in it, one recites over it who creates the various kinds of nourishment, even if it is mixed with other ingredients. Gufa. Rav Shmuel Amar Tarvayu kol sheyesh bo mechameshet aminin mavarchin ala borei minei mazonot. Ve'itmar nami, Rav Ushmuel Amar Tarvayu kol shehu mechameshet aminim mavarchin alav borei minei mazonot. With regard to the halacha of the blessing recited over the 5 species of grain, the Gemara clarifies the matter itself. Rav and Shmuel both said anything that has of the 5 species of grain in it, and one recites over it who creates various kinds of nourishment. Elsewhere it was stated that Rav and Shmuel both said anything that is from the 5 species of grain, one recites over who creates various kinds of nourishment. This is problematic, as these statements appear redundant. So, what's the meaning of such a redundancy? Tzricha. It's necessary. De'i ashmeinan kolshehu hava amina mishum de'ite ba'ene aval al yedei tarovot lo. The Gemara explains both statements are necessary, as had he taught us only anything that is from the 5 species of grain, one recites over it who creates various kinds of nourishment, I would have said that because grain, it is because the grain is in its pure, unadulterated form. But if one eats the grain in the context of a mixture, no, one does not recite who creates the various kinds of nourishment. We turn the page to Amud Aleph, Daf Lamed Zayin. Kamash Malan Kol Sheyesh Bo. Therefore, he teaches anything that has of the 5 species of grain in it, even if it is in the context of a mixture with other ingredients. Kol sheyesh bo, v'iyash minan kol sheyesh bo, hava amina kol sheyesh bo chameshet aminim, im aval orez v'dochan lo. Mishum da'al yedei tarovet. Aval ite be'enei nema afilo orez v'dochan nami mavarchin al borei minei mazonot. So he had taught us anything that has of the 5 species of grain in it. I would have said that specifically over anything that has any of the 5 species of grain in it. Yes, one recites who creates various kinds of nourishment, mazonot, even if it is in the context of a mixture with other ingredients. However, anything that has rice, millet, no, one does not recite mazonos, because one is eating it in the context of a mixture. However, if rice or millet is in its pure, unadulterated form, say even over rice and millet one recites borei minei mazonos, who creates various kinds of nourishment, because they too are types of grain. Therefore, Kamash Malan, he teaches us specifically, anything that comes from the 5 species of grain, one recites over it, who creates the various kinds of nourishment. Lapuke orez v'dochan. This comes to exclude rice and millet, which one would not say borei minei mazonot over. Da'afilu ite be'enei, over which even in its pure unadulterated form, lo mavarchin borei minei mazonot, you wouldn't say mazonos bracha. So rice and millet. So we're talking about different types of grain. So Rabbi Steinsaltz adds on the side of the page, there is much that we don't know about the division into species in the Mishnah and the Talmud, and many distinctions are unclear. Nevertheless, there is a botanical distinction somewhat parallel to the Gemara's definition of species of grains. Within the grain family, there is a distinction between the Panacoidae family, that includes millet, rice, and corn, among others, which the Talmud does not consider grain, and the Poidae family, which includes the 5 species of grain. It might be Posidae, it might be a typo here. So, continue. V'orez v'dochan lo mavarchin borei minei mazonos. With regard to the previous conclusion, the Gemara asks, over rice and millet, we do not recite who creates various kinds of nourishment. V'hatanya, heviu lefanav pat v'orez ufat dochan, mavarech alav techila v'sof kamase kedera. It wasn't it taught in a brayta that if they brought before him rice bread or millet bread, he recites the blessing over it both before and after, as he would recite the blessing over a cooked dish containing dough from the 5 species of grain. V'gabei maaseh kedera tanya. And with regard to a cooked dish, it was taught in a brayta. V'tchila mevarech alav borei minei mazonot, u'levasof mevarech alav bracha achat me'en shalosh. At the start, one recites who creates the various kinds of nourishment. At the end, one recites a blessing abridged from the 3 blessings of the grace after meal, ala michya, the 3-fold blessing. Afterwards, one recites who creates apparently one recites who creates various kinds of nourishment over rice and millet. Halacha l'maaseh. The halacha, before eating uncooked rice, one recites who creates the fruit of the ground, borei pri adama, and therefore one creates, and thereafter, who creates many forms of life. The after bracha for rice, uncooked rice, would be borei nefashot rabot. If you boiled it in the pot and it's mashed, or ground it and baked it into bread, he says borei minei mazonot first, and afterwards the after bracha would be borei nefashot rabot, who creates many forms of life, as per the conclusion of the Gemara, which we will see in a moment. Contrary to the opinions of Rav and Shmuel, in the mixture of rice and grain, its status is determined by the majority component. Due to the dispute between Rashi and Tosfos with regard to what is orez, translated here as rice, some hold that the blessing to be recited over modern day rice today is shehakol niya b'dvaro. So, the way I learned it is with rice, if it's cooked, you say borei minei mazonot, and afterwards you say borei nefashot rabot, the after bracha. There is an opinion that could be used which I don't believe is a majority opinion, because of the Machlokas Rashi Tosfos about what actually rice is, you would say by default Shehakol, because of the uncertainty. But I think the way we do things these days is cooked rice. The first bracha is Borei Minei Mazonos, and after bracha is Shehakol Niyeh B'Dvaro. Kamase Kedera, V'lo Kamase Kedera. What did we just say? We just brought a proof. Over rice and millet, we say Borei Minei Mazonos, but there's a problem with this. Is that true? No, because we have a braita which says if they brought rice or millet before him, you say the same blessing that you say over a cooked dish containing dough from the 5 species of grain. In other words, mazonos before and afterwards me'en shalosh. In regard to a cooked dish, it was taught in a braita. At the start, you say Borei Minei Mazonot, and then you say me'en shalosh, just like I just said. Kamase kedera v'lo kamase kedera. The Gemara rejects this proof. Indeed, rice or millet is like a cooked dish, but it's also not like a cooked dish. So, the Gemara elaborates. It's a cooked dish. It is like a cooked dish in the sense that you say a blessing before and after. But it's not like a cooked dish in the sense that with a cooked dish, first you say mazonis and afterwards you say me'en shalosh, the abridged form of the 3 blessings of the grace after meal. She'akol niyah b'dvaro. But here, when we're talking about rice, first we say Shehakol, and then at the end we say who creates many forms of life, v'chesurnano kol mashbarata, and blessed is God who creates the many forms of life and their needs for all you have created. V'orez lav masa kedera, so the Gemara challenges, but isn't rice a cooked dish? V'hatanya elu hen masa kedera chilka tragis solit zariz arsan v'orez. The Braita teaches us these are the cooked dishes. Wheat kernels split in 2 parts. That's called chilka, like from Lashon cholek. Tragis, wheat kernels crushed into 3 parts. Tragis from the Greek. Tragos, meaning hulled grains. Groats, used for porridge. Solit is flour. Zariz, wheat kernels crushed into 4 parts. And arsan, that's wheat kernels crushed into 5 parts. According to Rav Sadia Gaon, these are types of shredded barley, just as tragus is crushed wheat. And orez, and rice. So the challenge is, we have a list in a braita of the 5 kinds of cooked dishes, and one of them is rice. Apparently rice is considered a cooked dish, just like crushed wheat. Hamani? Whose opinion is this in the braita? Rabbi Yochanan ben Nurihi. The Tanya Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri Omer, Orez min daganhu, v'chayavin al chimutzo karet. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri says rice is a type of grain in every respect, therefore one is liable to death by karet, excision, if it leavens on Passover and he eats it intentionally. Va'adam yotzei lidei chovato b'Pesach. And a person who ate matzah baked from rice fulfills his obligation on Passover. Aval Rabbanan lo, the halacha l'maaseh, rice on Passover. The prohibition of leaven on Passover does not apply to rice, and one does not fulfill his obligation on the eve of Passover with unleavened rice bread. Some prohibit eating rice on Passover based on a decree due to the concern lest actual leaven is mixed in with the rice, or lest people may mistakenly believe that it is leaven. This is the Ashkenazi custom, and one should not diverge from observance of that decree. If he's an Ashkenazi. If he's a Sephardi, he can eat rice. So it just goes to show you that the Messiah is going to be a Sephardi. Why will the Messiah be Sephardi? so everybody can eat at his house on Passover. No, clearly the Messiah is going to be Ashkenazi. Why? So the Ashkenazim can also eat at his house on Passover. Maybe he'll be a Sfaradi who holds with the stricture of the Ashkenazim. There's a good compromise. Really killed that joke. Anyhow, Rabbanan, lo, the Gemara challenges, and the rabbis hold that rice is not considered a cooked dish. V'hatanya, hakosesa techita mevrecha le'parei pri adama, tachana afa uvishla, bizman shehaprusot kayamot, betchila mevrecha la v'motzi lechem min haaretz, le'v'sof mevrecha mein shalosh brachot, v'im ein haprusot kayamot, betchila mevrecha le'parei min mozonot, le'v'sof mevrecha le'baracha achat mein shalosh. The Gemara challenges this. The rabbis hold that rice is not considered a cooked dish. How could you say a thing like that? Wasn't it Tadnut Tosefta, the one who chews wheat recites Borei Pri Adama? However, if he grounds the wheat and baked it and cooked it into bread, it's different. There's a distinction between the two situations. When the slices are intact and they did not dissolve, and the slices of the cut pieces of wheat, slices of wheat didn't dissolve in the boiling process, then at the start one recites Borei Motzi Lechem Min Haaretz, and at the end one says Me'en Shalosh, the abridged form of the grace after the three blessings of the grace after meals, the full form, as he does after eating bread. When the slices of wheat dissolved in the course of the boiling process that are not intact, then at the start one says Borei Minei Mezonot, in the end one says the abridged form of the three blessings of the grace after meal, Me'en Shalosh. HaKoses et ha'orez mavarech alav Borei Pri Adama. One who chews rice recites, who creates the fruit of the ground. Tachano, afa, vishlo, afal pi shehaprusot kayamot, batchila mavarech alav Borei Minei Mezonot, levasof mavarech alav baracha achat Me'en Shalosh. You chew rice, first bracha, Borei Pri Adama. If you ground it, baked it, and cooked it, even though its pieces are intact, at the beginning, the first bracha before you eat is Borei Minei Mezonot. In the end, you say them En Shalosh. Mani, Gemara discusses this Tosefta. Whose opinion is reflected in this Tosefta? Ilem Rabbi Yochanan ben Norihi Amar Orez min Daganhu Amotzi Lechem min Haaretz Shlosh Brachot Bai Baruch. If you say it's Rabbi Yochanan ben Nori who said that rice is a type of grain, it should have said that one must recite who brings forth bread from the earth beforehand, and the three blessings of the grace after Me'en Shalosh afterwards, as one does for eating bread. Elalav Rabbanan, but shouldn't this brayta that we said reflect the opinion of the rabbis? But Tiyufta Rav Shmuel. In that case, it would be a conclusive refutation of the opinions of Rav and Shmuel. Tiyufta, the Gemara comments, indeed, it is in fact a conclusive refutation of their opinion. Amar mar hakoses etechita mavarech ale borei pri adama. The master taught in the Tosefta, if somebody choose wheat, choose wheat, what bracha does he say? Borei pri adama. V'atanya borei min Yisraim. Wasn't it taught in a brayta that if you chew wheat, you would say who creates various kinds of seeds, a blessing that we don't have today, that they used to have? Lo kasha. This is not a difficulty. Ha Rabbi Yehuda, ha Rabbanan. The Gemara resolves the problem. It's not difficult. It's the subject of is a Tanaitic dispute. This opinion, one must recite Borei min Yisraim, was the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. And the other opinion that if you're chewing wheat, you say Borei Pri Adama, that's the opinion of the Rabbanan. The Tanan al Yirakot Omer, over, as we learned in the Mishnah, over herbs and leafy vegetables, one recites Borei Pri Adama. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Borei Minei Deshayim. Rabbi Yehuda says, you say who creates various kinds of herbs, like it said in our initial Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda designates specific blessings for every type of plant, and he certainly distinguishes between vegetables in general and seeds. Amar Mar hakoses the oris. V'varech la borei pri adama v'tachano afo v'shlo afal pi shehaprusot kayamot v'tchila v'varech la borei minei mozonot levasof bracha achat me'en shalosh. Same Tosefta taught that the master said, Amama, one who chews rice recites who creates the fruit from the ground. If one ground it, baked it, and cooked it, even though the pieces are intact, and he starts and recites, who creates various kinds of nourishment, and at the end one recites, and at the end, at the start he says Borei Minei Mezonot, and at the end he recites the blessing of Me'en Shalosh, the abridged form of the three blessings. V'atanya, the Gemara raises the challenge, wasn't it taught in a Braita Levasof Lo Klum, that in this case, at the end, one doesn't need to say any of the blessings recited over the fruit of Eretz Yisrael, but rather, Borei Nefashot Rabot? Amar Rav Sheshet, Lo Kasha. Rav Sheshet says it's not a difficulty. Har Rabban Gamliel, V'har Rabbanan. This, that one recites the blessing in the abridged form from the three blessings of the grace of the Meals, is the opinion of Rabban Gamliel. And the other opinion, this opinion, that one only recites who creates many forms of light, Borei Nefashot Rabot, is the opinion of the Rabbanan. V'tanya, the Tanya, Zeh Klal, Kol Shu, Mishivat Aminim, Rabban Gamliel, Omer, Shalosh Brachot, V'chacham Yomrim Baracham Achad Men Shalosh. As it was taught in the Tosefta, that this is the principle, anything that is from the 7 species of grains, of fruits, and fruits which grow from Eretz Yisrael, the fruits for which the land of Israel is praised. Rabban Gamliel says, afterwards one recites only the 3 blessings of the grace after meal. And the rabbis say, no, you don't say the whole 3 blessings of the grace after meals, like you do after bread, but rather you say the abridged form of Me'en Shalosh. Umase b'Rabban Gamliel v'azakenim shayu mesubin ba'aliyah b'Yericho. A little story about Rabban Gamliel and the elders, the sages who were sitting in an upper floor in Jericho. They haviu lifneim kotavot v'achlu, and they brought dates before them, and they ate. V'natan Rabban Gamliel l'reshut l'Rabbi Akiva levarech, and Rabban Gamliel, who was the president of the Nasi of the Sanhedrin at the time, the leader, he granted the permission to Rabbi Akiva to lead them in the grace after meals. Kafatz uverach Rabbi Akiva bracha achat men shalosh. Rabbi Akiva hurried and he said the one blessing abridged from the 3 blessings of the grace after meals. Amar le Rabban Gamliel, Akiva, ad matay ata machnis roshcha ben hamachloket. Akiva, until when will you continue to stick your head into the dispute among the sages with regard to what you did? In other words, you know that the rabbis say you're doing it differently from the way the rabbis taught it. You're following an opinion that was under dispute. Amar lo Rabbeinu. So Rabbi Akiva said back to Rabban Gamliel, our teacher, Af al pi she'ata omer ken v'chaverecha omrim ken v'limadtanu Rabbeinu yachid v'rabim halacha karabim. Rabbi Akiva said, our teacher, even though you said that while your colleagues disagree and say that you taught us, our teacher, the general principle that guides the resolution of halach disputes, in the dispute, and you said in the dispute between an individual and the many, the halach is in accordance with the opinion of the many, the majority view. Although you are the Nasi, it is appropriate to act in accordance of the many. What was Rabban Gamliel's opinion? If you have any of the 7 species of fruits that for which the land of Israel is grains and fruits for which the land of Israel is praised, what do you say according to Rabban Gamliel? You say one recites the 3 blessings of the grace after meals, and the majority opinion is the abridged form, the shorter form of the Me'en Shalosh. So that's why Rabbi Akiva said, what did he say? He said, Kafatz uverech Rabbi Akiva bracha achat me'en shalosh. So there's a difference between me'en shalosh and one of the me'en shalosh. Some explain that he rushed to recite a blessing hastily, as in deference to Rabban Gamliel, he did not want to argue with him. Therefore, he said, some say that when it says in the Gemara, achat me'en shalosh, it doesn't mean he said from the abridged form. It actually means he was reciting the blessing of the full form, like the majority opinion, but he was saying it quickly. as once he reached the point in the blessing where he mentioned the name of God, they would not force him to repeat or alter his blessing. So he rushed to get to Hazanat Kol. In God's name, Baruch Atah Hashem Hazanat Kol, or whichever one of the three he was saying. What's this sticking your head into the dispute? Presumably, even had he acted in accordance with the opinion of Rabban Gamliel, he still would have stuck his head into the dispute. Rather, the explanation is that everyone agrees that grace after meals exempts food items over which one recites the blessing abridged from one of the three blessings of the grace after meals. Therefore, Rabban Gamliel thought it would have been preferable to recite the blessing in a manner in which he fulfills his obligation according to all opinions. So that might be, Rabban Gamliel might have been actually doing a compromise position, which would actually follow, in a sense, the majority, but not exactly the way they said. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Mishmo Kolshu Mishivat Minihim. The Gemara records a variation on the dispute between Rabbi Gamliel and the rabbis. Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rabbi Kiva, with regard to anything that is from the 7 species, Velo min daganhu, and is not a species of grain, o min dagan velo asaofat, or if it's which is a species of grain, but it hasn't been made into a bread, there's a dispute. Rabban Gamliel omer shalosh brachot v'chachamim omrim bracha achad. Rabban Gamliel says one recites the 3 blessings of the grace after meal, the full 9 yards. And the rabbis said, no, one recites a single blessing. Kol she'eno lo mishivat minim v'lo min dagan kagon pat orez v'duchan. Rabban Gamliel omer bracha achad men shalosh v'chachamim omrim lo klum. Anything that is neither one of the 7 species nor a species of grain, such as rice, bread, or millet, Rabban Gamliel says that after eating one recites one blessing abridged from the 3 blessings of grace after meal. And the rabbis say that one need not recite any blessing from the grace after meal, but rather Borei Nefashot Rabot, who creates many forms of life. If so, the Tosefta, which says that after rice one recites one blessing abridged from the 3, it is in accordance with Rabbi Yehuda's version of Rabban Gamliel's opinion. B'mai ukimta, the Gemara Shaza, how do you establish this Tosefta? An ukimta is basically when the sages are at a loss to justify the tradition in their hands, or perhaps, in other words, to understand it and how we act according to it, then they offer a logical solution. So, what's the ukimta? Rabban Gamliel. Established in accordance to Rabban Gamliel. Ema Sefer Deresha. Say the latter clause of the first section of the Tosefta, which states that even over wheat bread, im ein haprusot kayamot, when the slices are not intact, then one says, when בתחילה מברך עליה בורא מיני מזונות, לבסוף מברך עליה ברכה אחת מן 3. Mani. So, the latter clause of the first section of the Tosefta says the following. When even over wheat bread, when the slices are not intact, then at the start one says borei minei mazonos, and at the end one says one of the blessings from the 3 blessings, an abridged from the 3 blessings of the grace after meal. One blessing abridged from the 3 blessings. Mani, whose opinion is reflected in that section of the Tosefta? I Rabban Gamliel hashta akotavot va'adaisa amar Rabban Gamliel 3 brachot v'im ein haprusot kayamot mibaya. If that's the opinion of Rabban Gamliel, now then what's it going to be with dates and pounded wheat? Rabban Gamliel said that one recites 3 blessings of grace after meal, all 3, in a case where the slices of bread are not intact. If it is the opinion of Rabban Gamliel now over dates and pounded wheat, Rabban Gamliel said that one recites 3 blessings, all of them, in a case where the slices of bread are not intact. So is it necessary to say that one recites the grace after meal? If over dates and pounded wheat, he says that we say 3 blessings of the grace, then in a case where the slices of bread are not intact, is it even necessary to say that one recites the grace after meals? No. Ele pshita, rather it is clear that the Tosefta is in accordance with the opinion of the Rabbanan. Ele pshita Rabbanan v'yihachi kasha, the Rabbanan other Rabbanan. If so, there's a contradiction between one opinion of the rabbis and a second opinion of the rabbis. Le'olam Rabbanan. The Gemara resolved this and says, rather, actually the Tosefta is always in accordance with the rabbis. This Tosefta is in accordance with the rabbis. Rabbanan v'etani Rabbi Orez, and the rabbis, and they amended the text to teach with regard to rice. And at the end does not recite any blessing consistent with their opinion in the Braita. Marava, hai rihata de chaklahe de tafsebe kimcha. In a case, Rava said in the case over a farmer's mixture of flour and honey, to which they add extra flour, one says, Mavarech borei minei mezonot, who creates kinds of nourishment. My tama, this mida ikar dimachoza de la mapshi be kimcha. Because the flour is the primary ingredient in the mixture over the same dish, however, when it is prepared in the manner that is prepared in machozer, they did not add extra flour, and in that case one recites she'akol niya bidvaro. Ma'itama duv she'ikar. What's the reason for that? Because in that dish, the honey is the primary ingredient. V'hadaram Rava, and Rava went back and said, Idi v'idi borei minei maznot. Rava said, both of these, both this, the mixture of the farmers, and the mixture of machoza, you say borei minei mazonot. The Rav and Shmuel Amar Tavaya, because both Rav and Shmuel said, Kol sheyesh bo mechameshet aminim mavarchin ala borei minei mazonot. Anything that contains the 5 species of grain, the bracha you say over it is borei minei mazonot. Amar Rav Yosef, Hay chavitza de'it beperurin kazayet, batchila mavarech alav v'motzi lechem min haaretz, levasof mavarech alav shalosh brachot. Rav Yosef said over this cooked dish, which contains pieces of bread that are the size of an olive bulk. At the start, one recites, who brings forth the bread from the earth. And afterwards, one says the 3 blessings of the grace after meal as he would over bread. Over the same cooked dish, which does not contain pieces of bread the size of an olive bulk, deleit be'perurin. But tchila mevarech alav borei minei mazonot, v'sov mevarech bracha achat me'en shalosh. If same cooked dish, it doesn't have the pieces of bread that contain that are add up to an olive's bulk. At the beginning you say borei minei mazonot, and at the end you say me'en shalosh. Amar Rav Yosef menamin ala. Rav Yosef said, from where do I say this halacha? The Tanya. Haya omed makriv menachot b'Yerushalayim. If one stood and offered meal offerings in Jerusalem, in the temple, Omer Baruch Shechianu v'Kimanu v'Yiganu l'zman hazeh. One says the blessing, blessed is God who has given us life, sustained us, and brought us to this time, as it is the first time He fulfilled the mitzvah of offering a sacrifice. Natalan la'achalan mavarech motzi lechem min haaretz. When He would take the meal offering in order to eat them after. Sometimes the meal offering were not eaten, sometimes they were eaten by the one who brought them, at least part of them. Then he brings the offering the first time, he says Shechianu, and then this afterwards he would take the offerings to eat them, he would say Hamotzi lechem min haaretz. V'tanei alea v'kulan potchan kazayet. And it was taught on the topic of meal offerings, and all of the meal offerings, he crumbles them into pieces, approximately the size of an olive's bulk. This proves that over breadcrumbs, the size of an olive bulk, one says, Hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amar le Abaya, ele me'ata, letana devei Rabbi Yishmael, lemar porchan ad she machaziran lesaltan. Abaya said to Rav Yosef, but if what you say is true, then now, according to the Tana of the school of Rabbi Yishmael, who said with regard to meal offerings, he crushes them until he restores them to the form that they were in when they were flour, would you say that so too in that case? Hachinami, The lo baya bracha hamotzi lechem min haaretz. In that case, he also would not need to say hamotzi as the bracha beforehand. V'chitema hachi nami. And if you say that it is so, that he doesn't say hamotzi lechem haaretz over these meal offerings that were crushed and back into the form of bread, wasn't it taught in the Braita? V'atanya liket mikulan kazayet v'achlan im chametzu anush karet im matzahu adam yotze bo yidei chovato b'Pesach. Wasn't it taught in the Braita, the one who gathered an olive's bulk-sized portion from all of the crumbs of the meal offerings and ate them? If it was an offering of leavened bread, like that of a thanks offering, if he ate them on Passover, he's punishable by karet. If it was an offering of unleavened bread, one fulfills his obligation to eat matzah and Passover. This illustrates the breadcrumbs. Even the question is, what's the bracha on breadcrumbs? But then this proves that breadcrumbs, regardless of their size, are always considered bread. Hachavamayskinan b'she'ersan. Rav Yosef answered that this is not the case, and one does not recite a blessing over breadcrumbs as he would over actual bread. Rather, what are we dealing with here? We're dealing with when one mixed the breadcrumbs with water and compacted them. B'she'ersan, he compacted them into a single mass. Ihachi emasefa. If this is so, say the latter clause. V'hu she'achlan b'kadei achilat pras. In the latter clause, we learned that this case of one who eats the crumbs speaks specifically about when he ate them, all of the crumbs that constitute the size of an olive's bunk, and in the time it takes to eat a half loaf of bread. B'kdei achilat pras. V'i b'she'ersan hai she'achlan she'achlo mibayale. It can't be so with one compacted them into a single mass, because he says when he ate them is not appropriate. He should say he ate it, because it's one single mass. So in this case, when he ate it is what is needed to say as a single loaf. He needed to say she'achlo instead of she'achlan. So it's different. That's Rav Yosef's proof that what? You don't say a blessing over breadcrumbs, even if you compacted it together, even if you would say over, as you would say, motzi lechem and aretz over bread. What are we dealing with here? B'vav mi lechem gadol. We're dealing with a case where the crumbs came from a large loaf of bread, over which he was obligated to write, brings forth the bread from the earth. Over crumbs that were never part of a loaf of bread large enough to require the blessing, however, one need only recite a brei priyadama, as they are at least the size of an olive's bulk. Brei minim motzi lechem min haaretz. Crumbs that were never part of a loaf of bread large enough to require the blessing. Hamotzi. The point is that you're eating an olive size of the breadcrumbs. So hamotzi, even if it's breadcrumbs and it's packed together into a little piece, it's as long as it's an olive size, a kazayat, say hamotzi. My havale, Amar Rav Sheshet, Chai Chavitza. Since all of these proofs for and against this opinion were rejected, the Gemara asks, what conclusion was reached about this halacha? Amar Rav Sheshet Hai Chavitza, over this cooked dish, Afagav Deleit Be Perurin Kazayet, which contains breadcrumbs, even though it doesn't contain crumbs enough the size of an olive bulk, one says, Mavarech Alav Motzi Lechem min haaretz. One says, who brings forth the bread from the earth. Hamarava V'hu De'ika Ale Torita Denahama. Rava said, no, this is specifically a case where the crumbs still have the appearance of bread and did not dissolve completely. Okay, we're going to pause here and wish you a pleasant day and blessings from Jerusalem.